Welcome back, Honors. All right, so this is your second to last flip before the test. Now, here's the one giant perk, though, okay? If you go to my YouTube channel, you can actually use one of my other flips if you want to go ahead and bang out the next flip before your test, okay? So, oh, God, WWA, that's weird. So if you go to my YouTube channel, you can do this one tonight, and then you can move on again and you do your other one as well. I'm going to send out an email for it as well, so both flips are technically up. Now, some people are immediately going to be like, wait, what am I? You're going to make us answer on the other regular ones again? Well, I'm just trying to help you out so you can kind of like study. But this one, WC flip number 25, I'm going to send you the link to, because like that flip I actually kind of go overboard a little bit, and I kind of teach like an honors lesson to everybody because I think it's super important. All right, so but let's keep getting into the Reformation, right? So where we last left off, we were talking about the expanse of Lutheranism, right? We were talking about Lutheranism expanding into Norway and Sweden and growing. But then we stopped for a minute and we were like, oh, hey, but all this right here is mostly Roman Catholic and mostly Roman Catholic. But notice we got some other grays in here, like this dark gray right here, that dark gray, this lined area. Lutherans are not going to be the only type of Protestant that show up, all right? Another huge one that is massively important, and some people would argue geopolitically more important than Lutherans as time progressed, are Calvinists, right? And Calvinists were started by John Calvin. So let's talk about John Calvin a little bit, right? So if you look at his date years, it's 1509 to 1564. John Calvin was actually just, how many years that? He was 8 years old when Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the door of the church, right? So didn't actually happen, though. And we know this for a fact. All right, so more than likely for a fact. But anyway, so around 1517, he would have been about 8 years old, right? Real young buck. So he comes a little bit after Luther, right? And he's going to be taking Protestantism a step further, right? So now we've got multiple types of Protestants. We got Lutherans, we got Calvinists. There were other radical types of Reformation like Protestants called like the Anabaptists and stuff like that. So everything kind of got a little out of control. But what you're getting out of the Calvinist perspective is a little bit different, all right? So like, for example, the Calvinists tend to be much more, conservative is the wrong word. I keep touching my hair. Conservative is the wrong word. They tend to be a little bit more strict, right? Luther based his entire sect of Christianity modeled more off the idea of priests and lay people are pretty equal. We're like the brotherhood of this church. God is constantly present in the Eucharist, not just through the priest he is, etc., etc., etc. So Calvinists are going to change the game a little bit. And Calvinism revolves around some very intense stuff, right? For example, it revolves around three ideas that guide it. All right, well, let's talk about Calvin himself a little bit, though. Calvin, originally French, ends up getting banished to Switzerland, trained as a lawyer as well, right, a university student, and he starts to discuss and analyze the Bible, and his interest in it grows, and he starts to establish some new ideas and creates his new type of Protestant faith. And it hinges on several different factors, three in particular. And I know some of you are like, you only have two right here. There's three of them, right? Predestination is one, and we'll talk about that here in a second. A strict moral code, and we'll talk about that one in a second. And then one last one. No free will. Now, this is one that kind of perturbed a lot of people, right? Calvinists do not believe in free will, right? They believe the concept of free will doesn't really exist because of this belief, predestination. So Calvinists believe in a type of faith where God knows everything. At the beginning, at the end, the consequences, the things you will do right, the things you will do wrong, everything. Everything, everything. He knows who's going to go to heaven before they're even born. He knows who's going to go to hell before they're even born. So they believe that God, being this all-knowing power, has selected them as some of the elect that end up going to heaven, right, as Calvinists, whereas everybody else is not. All right, so he believes that also you should like submit completely to God, right? A lot of theologians actually have an acronym for it. It's called TULIP, right? So it's like the 5 guiding pillars or 5 guiding ideas of Calvinism. The pillars are, of course, of Islam. But they also believe, so we got predestination, no free will. They also believe in a very strict moral code, right? This strict moral code includes church attendance being required, or else you get a ticket. The only 2 colors you're allowed to wear are black and white. And you are not allowed to be like a drunk in public. You're not allowed to sing loudly in public. Churches are also usually devoid of music. Church masses are very, very long. So long, in fact, that one type of Calvinists known as the Puritans, you all know the Puritans very well, Scarlet Letter, am I right? They had this guy named the Tithing Man, who used to like walk around their masses with a stick, and he would actually hit kids that were misbehaving in the pews with this stick, or he would use the feathery end of it to like wake people up because their masses were so long, right? This is a tithing man at work right here. He's actually doing it. See him? Like, yeah, he's bopping people in the head for actually like not behaving during Mass. So as you can tell, the Calvinists are very, 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 very extreme people, right? But we're not going to talk about the types of them that show up just yet. We're going to talk about them much more as time goes on, right? So, but just know that the Calvinists exist, right? So then Protestantism is going to spread to England, right? Protestantism is then going to like kind of reach its grab out into England, right? And it's mainly because of this guy right up here in the top corner, right next to me, Henry VIII. Jot this down, his last name. He is a Tudor, right? Tudor. Now, this is a little bit of an intense story, but I need you to kind of buckle up, get fastened in, and let's get after it, all right? But make sure you're paying attention because this is good stuff. Now, Henry VIII, when he is king, has one surviving child, Mary, right? Mary Tudor. Well, the reason why he has one surviving child is mainly due to the fact that, genetically speaking, he does not have the strongest genes, right? And his ability to create healthy sons is very damaged, even though he begins to turn and blame one other type of person for his inadequacies, right? So he doesn't blame himself for his inability to have a son. He starts to blame his wives, right? That's right, I said it, plural, wives. Not like he's a polygamist, like he has multiple different wives at once, but more along the lines of that he ends up having 6 wives before it's all said and done. And he starts to blame them for his inability to have a son. So what he decides to do is he decides that he wants his marriage to his first wife, Catherine, to be annulled, right? Well, here's the problem. So a little backstory to him and Catherine's relationship. So Catherine is his first wife, right? And Catherine is Catherine of Aragon, right? So Catherine of Aragon is originally Spanish, right? She is the aunt to the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. She's a very, very intense figure. But what she is married, why she's married to Henry in the first place is because kind of like she was like a peace treaty, right? She was originally married to Henry for the reasons of creating a connection between Spain and England, right? Kind of like a little, like also known as marriages of convenience as time went on. Well, the thing is she wasn't just married to Henry. She was actually married to Henry's brother first, but then his brother died, right? And he wanted to marry Catherine to keep that peace treaty alive, right? And then to also try and have children with her. So he writes to the Pope, Pope Clement VII, and says, "Can I marry my brother's widow?" So what the Pope decides to do against his better judgment, he's like, you know what? I will let you marry Catherine, and I will give you this papal dispensation. So he writes a letter saying that Henry is allowed to get married to Catherine because Catherine's first marriage to his brother has now been annulled. Well, then Henry gets a little frustrated when Catherine doesn't produce any boy children, any male heirs to the throne, right? So now he writes another letter to Julius II, the same guy who paid for the School of Athens, the same guy who paid for the Sistine Chapel ceiling, that same guy, and was like, I want to get this marriage annulled. She's broken. Turns out it's not her fault. It's definitely your fault, my guy. But also not to mention the fact, too, that she had a lot of different pregnancies, but a lot of them were stillbirths, a lot of them were miscarriages, right? And so he begins to blame her for this, and he demands an annulment from the Pope, Pope Julius II, so he can go off, get married, and have a boy, right? Well, the Pope says no, right? Julius II says, dude, you really think that I'm about to give you an annulment after you had to ask for permission to marry her in the first place? This is not how this works, right? I know I'm doing a lot of head moving and stuff right now, but it's super important that you understand the story. So he tries to get that marriage to Catherine annulled. So Henry VIII, spitefully so, decides, you know what? Fine. And he goes off and he reforms his parliament, right? And he reforms parliament so England was no longer controlled by the Pope. They break away and they create a new church known as the Church of England. So now England has also gone Protestant due to the overbearingness of their ruler, Henry VIII, right? And when he becomes the new head of the Church of England, they also give it another name. So anytime you see this word as well, this also means the Church of England, the Anglican Church, right? We're called that because, of course, the Angles is where the word English comes from, or Anglish, or the land of the Angles is England. So they call it the Anglican Church, paying homage to the old school barbarian founders, right? So they start the Anglican Church, and he becomes the head of the Church of England, right? And he gets his annulment to Catherine done. Well, actually, he doesn't even do that. He divorces her completely, right? So they get a divorce, and then Catherine is banished to Wales, right? So she ends up having to move to Wales, and she ends up dying there under house arrest later on. And guess who's living there with her the whole time? Mary. And does Catherine ever stop being Catholic? No! She remains Catholic for the rest of her life and raises his daughter Mary as a Catholic as well. Just keep that in mind. We're going to come back to Mary here in a minute, right? But he keeps Mary very Catholic, right? So anyway, Henry gets the divorce from Catherine, and then he goes off and he marries Anne, right? Anne Boleyn. Now, Anne Boleyn is, as you can tell, I'm going to write all these names up here. Anne Boleyn is one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting, right? So she's one of the assistants to the queen or one of her best friends. So he decides to go and he gets married to her, marries Anne Boleyn, and Anne Boleyn gets pregnant, and Anne Boleyn gives birth to a what? Girl, right? So now, he has another female child named Elizabeth the First, right? So, who has major implications in our country. Elizabeth I, when she becomes queen later on, claims that she never refuses to get married and claims that she has never actually felt the touch of a man, and she also claims that she was a virgin, so they end up naming the state Virginia after her, right? So, but anyway, Elizabeth is the product of their marriage. So yet again, Henry demands another divorce. He's like, you know what, Anne Boleyn, I refuse to say married to you. You're another girl that's just broken and messed up, and you're not producing any sons for me. I hate you. And he tries to get rid of her. She refuses to get a divorce from him. And so he ends up taking her to Parliament, and he has her beheaded, right? So she's going to be beheaded by the Parliament of England for a variety of different reasons. Some people claim that she was a witch. Other people claim that she was cheating on him the whole time with one of his advisors. Actually, one of his advisors also ends up dead. Sir Thomas More, the guy who wrote the Utopia, he ends up dead because he actually advised him into marrying Anne Boleyn the entire time. So then, during this whole process, so he's had two wives so far, Catherine and Anne Boleyn, who gave him Elizabeth I and Mary, right? Mary and Elizabeth I, and Elizabeth I is, of course, going to remember Protestant, okay? And Mary's going to stay Catholic the rest of her life. During this point, he actually forces the entirety of England to do this thing called the Act of Supremacy. And in the Act of Supremacy, he forces England to take an oath where they declare that he, the king, is the supreme head of the Church of England, much like its now new pope, right? And this breaks him completely away from the Holy Roman Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Empire, and it creates a new type of Protestantism that's directly linked to to the government, right? To the government of England. Now, here's the other crazy part. He ends up having several more wives. 4 more in total, right? Let's run through those people real quick because it is super important that you understand who they are and where they come from. So, Anne Boleyn gets beheaded, right? If you want to go ahead and know a way to remember the wives and the order of which they went in, it goes like this. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived, right? So let's talk about the one that died. That's a girl named Jane Seymour, right? So Jane Seymour is going to be his 3rd wife, and she is unfortunately going to die giving birth to his one male son, Edward the Sixth, right? Edward the Sixth is Henry's only surviving male son, right? Now, here's the thing. Let's check out Edward VI real quick. Edward VI is a very sickly child. Also, Jane Seymour is going to die during childbirth, right? She died giving birth to Edward, right? So Edward also grew up constantly sick. He got the flu constantly. He got scarlet fever at one point. He almost died multiple times. He's probably pretty aware also that he's not going to make it or see the end of his rule, right? So Henry dies, and Edward does become the King of England for a time. See, this is a part of the story that a lot of people never tell you. Edward actually followed his father and became the King of England as Edward VI, right? So before Edward actually even becomes king, he has 3 other wives, right? Henry has 3 other wives. We got another Catherine, right? And it's Catherine, oh wait, no. It's not Catherine, it's Anne of Cleves, right? So Anne of Cleves is his wife, divorced, beheaded, died. Anne of Cleves he ends up getting a divorce from because he thinks that she's not attractive. And then we have another one named Catherine. It's another Catherine that I can never remember what her name is. But then we have a Catherine Parr, who is the one surviving Catherine, right? And she ends up actually outliving Henry altogether. So Catherine Parr ends up outliving him, but he has 6 wives in total. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived, right? So anyway, but Edward does become king at one point, but unfortunately he dies at the age of 15 from tuberculosis, right? So he dies from tuberculosis at the age of 15, which is very, very unfortunate. Super, super sad. And during this entire process, he dies from tuberculosis, even though he tried to give the throne to a close family, their cousin, actually, the Greys. It's a whole crazy story. I'll tell you about that in class. Just ask me about it in class. Be like, Mr. Terry, what happened to Lady Jane Grey, the woman he tried to give the throne to, even though he was never married to her? A bunch of other crazy stuff about Edward, and I'll tell you that stuff in class. But what ends up happening is his sister, Mary, returns to the throne of England and becomes England's now queen. Now, remember where Mary came from. She is the daughter of Catherine, who had never stopped being Catholic, who was under house arrest in Wales. So Mary is fervently Catholic, right? Crazy intense Catholic. She becomes Catholic and tries to bring all of England back to Catholicism, right? Here's the other crazy part. A lot of these Anglicans, right? A lot of these Protestants, these Anglicans that Henry had created, right? When he created the Church of England, a bunch of them left to keep being Protestant, and they went to Switzerland. They met up with John Calvin in Switzerland. They come back, and now they're Puritans, right? Scarlet Letter. That's where they came from, because they went and communicated with Calvin when Mary was in power back in England. And she starts executing a bunch of people. She starts burning people at the stake for their Protestant beliefs. She has over 300 people in England executed for their Protestant beliefs. And she earns herself the nickname Bloody Mary, right? Well, then Mary is going to die because she actually took over the throne when she was a little bit older, and I'll give you some more details in class. And then Elizabeth becomes queen after her, right? And Elizabeth is a major power figure during the entirety of England, right? English history. It's known as the Elizabethan period. She's a phenomenal leader, a very intense leader. She never got married. Of course, Virginia is named after her. And she is going to take over, and she's going to bring England back to Anglicanism and back to Protestantism. And she's also going to then take the government and split it from the church altogether. She actually referred to herself as more of the governor at the church, less the head of it, right? Because she believed that politics and religion shouldn't be mixed together. So that's Protestantism in England, right? We are going to fill in some details in class. I didn't want to make this thing too long or too intense, but we'll talk about it tomorrow. I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.